Welcome to day two of the Word of Mouth Digital Summit. We're glad you could join us for day two. Looking forward to another day of insightful sessions spanning across customer referral, affiliate, influencer, and partner marketing initiatives. Today, we're kicking it off with Nicole Couture from West Corporation. But before I hand it over to her, let me go over a few quick reminders. First off, this session and all sessions will be recorded and available after the summit. Second, we'll try our best to answer questions during the presentation, so please use the questions section. Nicole has someone from her team live chatting, so get in there, engage. They'll answer your questions. They'll engage back with you. And lastly, this is a digital event about word of mouth, so please spread the word to the world. Post about it. Use the hashtag WOM-Summit19, WOM Summit 19. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Nicole from West. She's a rockstar communications leader with a unique educational background, deep product marketing expertise, and results-driven approach. Nicole is VP of Go-to-Market Strategies from West Digital Media Solutions based in London, UK. Thanks for joining us today Nicole, and I'll let you take it from here.
Great. Thank you, Sam, and thank you, everybody, for joining us. I'm going to set the stage for a new era of transparent, authentic amplification. Today, we're going to be talking about Influencer Marketing 2.0, which hinges on finding the right influencer for your campaign. To begin, I think we have to level set a little bit and admit to ourselves that the gold rush is over, right? A couple of years ago, influencer marketing was still a new tactic, and we were all using it, and we were all very excited. Companies of all sizes were rushing to drive results this way. Fast forward a little bit, and now I think it's safe to assume the gold rush is over, and this isn't a niche tactic anymore. But that also means, as it's become more popular and more pervasive, that other negative side effects have occurred. Now here come the trolls, here comes the negative press, the backlash, and of course some legislation. So this has us moving past that wild adoption phase into a more mature version of influencer marketing, which really emphasizes transparent, authentic amplification over the arguably fire hose approach that we started with. So now that this is becoming more commonplace, companies are starting to realize that not all influencers are created equal, and simply having an influencer marketing campaign might not necessarily drive the results you're looking for. Today, we've come to understand that the platform matters. You have to choose the right platform for your target audience and for the influencer themselves. And for most importantly, you have to find the right influencer. It's not just enough to have an influencer marketing campaign. You have to have the right individual to drive real results. And now we're also starting to see backlash on both sides, which is moving us into this newer, less wilder phase of influencer marketing. This sees brands pushing back on volunteer influencers, social influencers sounding off against one another, and a drive towards attribution and admitting that when the content we're looking at is an ad, that it's actually an ad. But before we talk more deeply about transparency and authenticity and right-sizing your amplification, I want to make sure we level set and that we're all on the same page in terms of what is influence. We used to think in the early days of influencer marketing that really reach was the most important thing. Got a massive audience on social? Awesome, you're an influencer. So your reach is really your total audience size across all networks. But that's only one component of what makes someone truly influential. And the other two pieces, I would argue, are even more important than just the number of followers you have. One element is your resonance. That is how much activity you create when you post. I have a pretty modest following out there, but I don't create a lot of resonance. So I am not an influencer. This is a really important element to make sure you're getting the right influencer for your campaign. And arguably most important is the relevance. How relevant is someone to a given topic? This is critical when you're looking to drive real results with an influencer marketing campaign, because the individual you choose might create a lot of activity and might have a really wide audience, but if they're not relevant to the given topic, the whole thing is going to backfire. So 3 elements: reach, resonance, and relevance. And when you get them right, you get transparent, authentic amplification that's right for your brand and for your campaign. So the first element I want to talk about in this new era of influencer marketing is transparency. And we could also call this a bit of a cautionary tale on how not to become the next Fyre Festival. So if you haven't seen it yet, there is a great documentary on Netflix about the ill-fated Fyre Festival and the massive influencer campaign which drove people out to the Bahamas for what was going to be the most amazing music festival ever, and which turned out to be probably one of the saddest gatherings in a tropical setting ever held, and which was proof to everyone that witnessed it that you need more than just a bunch of influencers to promote something. The initial campaign for the Fyre Festival generated more than 6 million unique impressions in just the first 5 days of the campaign. Amazing, right? But you can have too much of a good thing. If your campaign isn't transparent, or worse, in the case of the Fyre Festival, you're promoting an outright pipe dream, the power of social influencers can and will backfire. And when it does, it won't necessarily be versus the influencers that backlash happens. The backlash will come for you and your brand. When we think about the Fyre Festival and the debacle that it became, do we really blame Kendall Jenner or Bella Hadid? No, we blame the folks behind the Fyre Festival, the people who pushed this pipe dream out to the world via an influencer marketing campaign. So there's some backlash for the influencer, sure, but it's really the brand who's going to suffer when transparency just isn't there. So how do you build that transparency? First and foremost, with trust, by being upfront and honest and transparent when the content is an ad. Now, some countries like here in the UK already require sponsored posts to be tagged as such, and some countries like the UK have even published lengthy guidelines. The bottom line here is that people don't like ads, but we especially don't like ads when they're disguised as genuine content. You're never going to have that level of transparency unless you can build trust by being upfront and honest when it's an ad, by adding those ad or sponsored or partner posts. This is an example, an interesting one, I think, where almost there, right? There was a sponsored tag on it. It's clear from the post itself that Gigi here is enjoying McDonald's French fries at Coachella as a partner of McDonald's. But there was still a ton of backlash on social for this particular one, because even though this was transparent, the trust just wasn't there, because at the end of the day, this wasn't the right influencer for the campaign. Do we think this leggy supermodel spends the time in between sets at Coachella eating McDonald's French fries? We don't, right? We don't buy it. So at the end of the day, to add on to transparency and really start to build that trust, you need to add authenticity, which is the next thing we're going to talk about. Because if you don't have the right influencer, that campaign of yours can end even before you get a chance to get it off the ground. You have to think of an influencer and their role in your campaigns as a brand ambassador. They're representing your brand out there, and so they have to be a good fit. In the same way as you would think about a new employee, they have to be a good fit for your organization. They have to fit culturally with your office or with your group. You have to think about influencers in the same way. And if you don't, again, the campaign's going to end before it even begins. This example that I'm showing here, this sad mea culpa from Pepsi, was a great example of the wrong influencer. It might have been a great campaign, except that we didn't have the right individual to drive that influence. This is back in 2017. Pepsi put out a video across YouTube and multiple social channels, really trying to piggyback a little bit on some of the social advocacy that was such a trend at the time. Now, arguably, it's pretty tone deaf to think you can calm down riot cops by handing them a can of Pepsi. But at the end of the day, the real backlash was because no one believed for a second that Kendall Jenner was relevant in this particular commercial, that we don't know her as being a social advocate. We don't think of her when we think of social advocacy. So in this case, this campaign, which I'm sure had a lot of money behind it and which arguably had a massive influencer, it just didn't have the right influencer. And it was a massive debacle for Pepsi, who had to make this sad apology on Twitter, and whose brand was really hurt ultimately, simply because they had the wrong influencer. There's no doubt Ms. Jenner is massively influential. We just don't think of her as somebody who's influential in terms of social advocacy. But even when you have the right influencer, it has to be real. You just have to keep it real, man. Too much staging, too much of what's not real, and you're going to lose the key to any great marketing campaign, which is authenticity. This example is from Listerine. This was a backfired campaign across Instagram, mainly because there was just nothing real about this post. They had someone who was arguably kind of the right individual to reach the the mom audience they were looking at, but the ultra stage setting, the superposed model, the unbelievable version of a morning routine. I mean, come on, does this look like your morning? This was just a debacle from the beginning, right? Because it just wasn't honest. It wasn't real. And the comments were scathing. So the folks at Listerine had to backtrack, end the campaign, and are probably going to be reticent to sort of kick that same kind of effort on, simply because this just wasn't real enough for people to accept it. So that realness is an important element, but you have to realize that authenticity works both ways. And here's the kind of spoiler alert for everyone in the audience, that people who come to you and say they are influencers might actually not be the best folks for your brand. This is a shot from the White Banana Beach Club in the Philippines, who recently made a lot of noise, kind of proclaimed that they were no longer going to collaborate with any self-proclaimed influencers, that they were seeing this massive influx of people who wanted free nights at their resort, who wanted free everything while they were there in exchange for sponsored posts that were supposedly going to drive just a ton of traction for the resort. You know, at the end of the day, what they saw was, I'm giving away a bunch of free stuff and nothing is coming back to our brand. This is becoming more and more commonplace as companies put their hands up and say, you know what, these volunteers are great, but they're just not right for our brand. The comments that you see on this resort's Instagram and similar Instagrams are pretty scathing. One commenter called influencers modern day grifters. And there are certainly a lot of examples of individuals and families who seem to make a living by travel blogging, trading their influence for trips and hotel stays and special experiences. But the more folks who self-select as influencers, the greater the risk that they're just not the right influencer for your brand. So you have to keep in the driver's seat on this at all times. No matter how easy it might seem to just let them come to you, you have to stay in control when you're selecting the right influencer for your campaign. So if we've got a level of transparency and we've got the right authentic influencer, the next thing to really think about is the size of amplification that you need. Again, in the early days of influencer marketing, we all just took this big fire hose approach and thought, well, if I could get to the widest audience possible, why wouldn't I want to do that? But I think we've come to an understanding that this is really more about quality engagement than necessarily quantity of impressions or actions taken on your campaign. So here's a really great example. This was one of the standout influencer marketing campaigns of 2018. This is an Australian fresh meal company called Youfoodz, and they wanted to promote the launch of their new winter menu by leveraging Instagram. So they enlisted the help of 81 influencers across Instagram who created 167 pieces of content, more than 160 stories that ran during the campaign, which resulted for Youfoodz in more than 70,000 direct engagements and over 500,000 total impressions. They managed to reach more than 1.5 million people across Facebook and Instagram. Amazing, right? If you're not prepared for that kind of influx, that kind of activity, this is the sort of thing that could literally topple your brand. If you have a 2 or 3 person marketing gang and they are struggling with their current bandwidth as it is, if you hit gold and run a really great campaign that brings in a massive amount of engagement, you could be stuck with literally too much of a good thing. At the end of the day, the widest reach isn't always the right reach. You know, I might love for a Kardashian sister to take a shine to my webcasting platform and start shouting from the rooftops about it. But at the end of the day, that wide a swath an audience isn't actually necessarily the prospects that I'm looking for. So again, we're talking about quality of amplification rather than just quantity. And we do that by right sizing our amplification, by thinking about influencers in terms of their size and their niche. So we come first of all to the mega influencers, right? These are the folks we sort of started out with, perfect for the fire hose approach. They usually have more than 1 million followers across multiple different channels. There really are celebrities, right? These are folks who typically make their name in the real world first and then become massive, massive superstars on social. They have very broad fan bases, but often not very well defined audience interests, right? So they might reach a really wide amount of people, but have a very wide number of topics that they might be somewhat influential on. As we go to the right, we now come to macro influencers. And these guys, we're getting more specialist here. These are folks that have still a very wide following, 100,000 to 1 million different followers. Usually they've gained their fame via social. So they know the social game. They're well respected or trusted on their social networks. They usually have slightly more focused following. So we're starting to get away from the fire hose and narrow down a little bit. These might still be very broad topics, right? If you're looking for travel, you may find macro influencers here. So we're starting to narrow down, but these guys still have a very, very wide audience. If we're looking for something more niche, something more targeted, we're really talking about a micro or a nano influencer. The micro influencers usually have an audience between 1,000 and 100,000 followers. These are our social champions. They have smaller followings, but typically very high authenticity. They've built that following from scratch. The following is a little too big for them to have a one-to-one relationship with all those folks, but they typically create great amount of resonance when they post, and they have that very high level of authenticity or resonance with a specific topic. And our champs, the unsung heroes of influencer marketing today, I feel, are our nano influencers. These folks only usually have about up to 1,000 followers, but they're our social ninjas. They're very niche followings with a heavy amount of influence over a very narrow market or segment. You've got a very targeted topic you want to talk about. Your nano influencer is likely to still have a personal relationship with as many as all of their 1,000 followers. And they've built up that following sort of one person at a time. So they have that level of credibility and influence over a smaller market, but a more focused market. So when you're looking to really drive targeted results with an influencer marketing campaign, this should really be the first element in terms of how you select the right influencer. What category are we talking about in terms of the amplification that we need to drive the results we're looking for? And if you're one of our B2B folks in the audience today, you're almost always going to be looking for these micro or nano influencers. You have a more targeted message and a targeted audience. And so you need to sort of slim it down a little bit. As much as we might want one of those celebrities to be pushing our brand, if you're in the B2B space, you're really looking at a micro or a nano influencer to drive the right results. And this is a good example, again, for the B2B folks in the audience who often, one of the common questions I get about influencer marketing is, is it relevant for B2B? Could you even do this? And actually you can. Influence sizing, that is picking the right level of amplification, is critical if you're going to try to deploy influencer marketing in the B2B space. This is a great example from Time Warner Business Class, who created video testimonials featuring some of their SMB customers. So they picked some well-known customers that would really help drive, from an influence standpoint, the message with a very targeted, very niche audience. Each of these videos highlighted the importance of Time Warner services for business success. The SMEs kind of talked about their experience using Time Warner services to help them meet their goals. And ultimately, it was a really successful B2B campaign. So we're not talking millions of impressions. What we're talking about here is the right results in the right audience segment that we're looking for. So we've talked about transparency and authenticity and the importance of right sizing your amplification. And where do we go from here? If this is influencer marketing 2.0, what does the future look like? So first, I wanted to ask the audience a question, something to think about as we think about where we go from here is, can you manufacture influence? Can you create the intangible? One company in LA called Brood thinks you can. They're a technology startup who specialize in artificial intelligence and robotics. And this is their creation, their masterpiece, a robotic influencer named Michaela, who has more than 1.5 million followers on Instagram. That number kind of blows my mind. Her presence on Instagram and her position as an influencer, helping brands to get the word out about specific products and services, has been highly controversial. Some folks feel that this is just out and out fake, that this is beyond a lack of transparency and right into deception. Other folks who took the time to read her profile and who are aware of the fact that she's fake say that actually this is a way to sort of create a targeted audience that knows exactly what they're getting. One thing we know, though, is that the future of influence will not include anything to do with purchasing followers or creating a fake presence. We're starting to see the networks like Instagram and Facebook already crack down on this and even come after some of the companies who are selling these fake likes and fake followers. And where we go from here together, 4 things I wanted to leave you with before we move on to some questions from the audience. First and foremost, that level of transparency, your sponsor or ad or partner tag, that's the new norm. If you're not already doing that today, you need to start building that into your campaigns. It may not necessarily be required or legislated in your market yet, but that's exactly where we're going. And remember, nobody likes ads, but we really hate content disguised as ads, right? We don't like to be fooled. And if you're going to serve me up an ad, that's fine. Just be upfront that it's an ad. We're also going to see this move towards right-sized audience, right? Away from the fire hose approach into really understanding when I'm trying to reach a specific niche or specific audience, I need to choose the right-sized influencer. And this is where we get into our segmented influencers. Thinking about the individual influencers in terms of the scope of their audience and how much influence they have over that audience is going to be critical to driving success in the future. And at the end of the day, authenticity is everything. If you're not going to be real about it, then maybe influencer marketing isn't for you. It simply has to be authentic. And when you get the right influencer and the right sized audience, that authenticity and the right sized amplification will follow. So I'm seeing some questions come in from our audience. We're going to tackle a few here, continue to key them in, and we'll have someone from our teams write you back responses for any questions that we don't get to handle during our session today. So the first question has come in from Kathy. She asks, how do you find influencers internally at your company? And this is a really good question and a great place to start. If you're still just dipping your toes into the influencer marketing waters, rather than go out to the World Wide Web, the Wild West of the World Wide Web, you may want to consider finding an influencer who already works with your company. They'll know your brand, they'll understand your values, and they'll already really be teed up to be a brand ambassador. So think about subject matter experts or leaders in your organization. We're really lucky here at Digital Media Solutions to have a very dynamic president. Ben Choder runs our organization, and he's an absolute subject matter expert when it comes to streaming and all things digital communications. We'd use him as our influencer in a heartbeat. So think about, who's in my organization, who are those leaders that make people sort of stand up and listen and that drive engagement internally. They may also, if you poke around on their social presence online, have a wide following and some expertise or credibility within a specific market segment. So think about those subject matter experts or leaders in your organization if you need a place to start in terms of finding influencers internally at your company. The next question has come in. This one is, can you recommend any tools that help identify influencers based on a given subject area or topic? So this is sort of the golden question, right? I'm sure at this point you're like, yeah, Nicole, I agree. You need the right influencer, but how do you find them? There's a lot of tools and a lot of tactics. And I think if you ask kind of 5 marketers how they do this, you'd probably get 6 answers back. It's research. And unfortunately, this is one of those areas where you just kind of have to put the time in. Social channels research is the way to start. So if you're thinking about an Instagram campaign, you should be poking around on Instagram, searching keywords, and really starting to look at individuals who come up in those searches. Follow them for a little while. Follow them for a couple days, get a feel for what their content looks like and what their tone of voice is. See if there's a feel there that they might be the right influencer. You can also Google bloggers and subject matter experts to find, who in your area or in that niche might be relevant. And there is tools, right? There are providers like West DMS who provide influencer targeting tools. I'm a huge fan of the tool that we have here at West. There's a variety of different options on the market there, all intended just to shorten the time frame, right? So these influencer targeting tools are not necessarily going to give you different results than if you searched yourself, but what they're going to do is give you that information in one place so you can more quickly and easily identify the right influencer. And I think we have time for one more question. This one's from Sarah. She asks, what are the best ways to compensate influencers? That's a really good question, right? Because at the end of the day, I think we're all pretty eyes wide open that nobody works for free in this world. And the influencers are certainly going to be expecting some sort of remuneration or compensation for their efforts. There's a few different options here. And I really recommend kind of establishing a good relationship with your influencer. This is someone who's a brand ambassador for you. You have to have a good relationship with them to really talk through how they've been paid in the past and what their preferences are. But it also comes down to what works for you. and your company. So, the first and most common tactic is payment per post. And, just giving the influencer some money based on per post. The thing about this piece is that if you are talking with a potential influencer and they come back with some crazy number, yeah, my fee is $20,000 per post. First of all, if that is like way out of the ballpark of your budget, that's not the right influencer, right? Their audience is too wide. You may need to narrow that down. But second, if that's really not going to drive value for both of us, it's really just going to be, I'm writing you a check, you may want to consider some other ideas. One other idea is to give the influencer free product or free services. I personally really like this tactic because it adds to the authenticity that the influencer is going to post that content with. If I've actually used the service, if I've actually tried out the product, if I'm writing my own content as an influencer, or maybe I'm writing it in coordination with your marketing team, I really need to have actually had my hands on that product. I'm going to have a much more authentic and real view of that product or service when I've actually used it. And the other thing you can consider is offering promotional codes, using promo codes and providing the influencer with a commission based on the amount of purchases made with that code. But you could also consider a combination of the two, right? Perhaps you give the influencer the free product or service so they can be really authentic in their feedback about it, but then also arm them with a promo code so that they can see some follow-on revenue based on the actual traction that they have out there in the market. So if you have other questions, please do feel free to type them in on the webcast player, and our team will make sure we get back to you. I want to thank you so much for tuning in. This has been a really fun session. We're going to be continuing the conversation online using the hashtag WOM Summit 19. And as mentioned earlier, we're going to be sending out a recording as well as sharing the presentation after the summit. So be sure to stick around. There's some really great sessions on deck, and thank you for watching.